Hey friends, this is Matt Sorens with World Relief and the Evangelical Immigration Table. If you follow me on Twitter or on social media, you know that I'm really concerned about what's happening with people, including many brothers and sisters in Christ who are part of local churches, who are losing their work authorization because of the ending of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, DACA. That was announced back in September, and we've been hoping and praying ever since then, at least, that Congress would resolve the situation by passing legislation that would permanently provide a solution for Dreamers, these young people who benefited from DACA. We'd hope that would happen before Christmas, and Christmas is coming up very quickly, and it looks less and less likely that that's going to happen on that timetable. In fact, some members of Congress have said, this isn't urgent. We have till March to deal with this. And they may be genuine in their thinking that they have till March to deal with this, but I really think that they are misunderstanding the impact of delaying further, of deferring action, if you will, on a solution for Dreamers. I want to explain a little bit why. You see, when the president and the administration announced the termination of DACA on September 5th, they gave people whose work authorizations expired in the next 6 months through March 5th just 1 month to complete a renewal application. Well, a lot of people did that, and I know at World Relief we did everything we could working with local churches to get the word out, but we didn't reach everyone. It's impossible to get the ears of everyone that they needed to apply, actually in some cases before they would otherwise have been expected to do so. And other people did get the word, and they did complete their application, and they got it in the mail before October 5th, even maybe a week or more before October 5th, and it got lost in the mail, and it ended up arriving after October 5th, and they didn't get their application approved. So what's happening now is there's roughly 122 Dreamers per day, each day that passes, that are losing their work authorization and losing their DACA protections. And then that's going to be increased exponentially starting in March, when people are no longer able to renew. So if your work authorization expired March 5th or after, you were not allowed to renew. And what that means is roughly 1,000 people per day are going to lose their work authorization, lose their DACA protections. So what does that mean that you lose your work authorization? It means that your employer is required by law to lay you off. They're not allowed to employ someone who's not authorized to work in this country, who doesn't have a valid work authorization card. And what that means is that those 1,000 people a day, starting in March, and that'll add up pretty quickly, are going to lose their jobs. It means they lose their only income. It means for many of them that they'll have to drop out of school because they don't qualify with DACA status for federal financial aid or even for loans, federal loans. So they are paying their way through college, through graduate school. And without that income, many of them will be forced to drop out. Others are, this is going to directly impact their families. We talk about DACA kids, but that's actually a misnomer. These are people who came as children, but they came as children 10 or more years ago. And many of them are now adults. They're married in some cases. They have children in some cases. In fact, there's about 200,000 U.S. citizen kids who have at least one parent who has DACA. And what happens when that parent, who is the breadwinner for the family, loses his or her job is that family doesn't have income, and they can't, afford groceries, afford basic needs. It means people who have a mortgage payment won't be able to make a mortgage payment. You could see foreclosures. It means people who have to pay rent, which, almost everyone's either paying rent or paying a mortgage, could face eviction because they can't pay their rent payment. So it's a very serious situation, not only for these young people who benefit from DACA, but for their families, for their communities, and frankly for the whole of the economy, for their employers who have trained and who have invested in good workers and are being told by the government they'll have to let them go. So if Congress would pass a bill in March, which seems to be what some of them would like to do, we might say, well, then that will resolve it. It'll be before the deadline. But that's not how this works. And that's because we're dealing with a federal bureaucracy. Only after Congress passes a bill can the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service know who would qualify for this theoretical new program that can't exist until the legislation is passed by Congress and signed by the president. So USCIS, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service, can't start this process now. They need to wait for a bill to be passed. Then they begin working on the regulations and the decisions of exactly what the process for application is, creating new forms, and that is likely to take somewhere around 4 months, maybe longer. And then once those forms exist and someone can apply for this new program to get work authorization, it's probably going to take at least 3 months for that work authorization application to be adjudicated, to be looked at by the right officials within the federal government to make sure that they qualify. So it's likely to take somewhere around 7 months or maybe more before anyone can get work authorization reinstated through this new program if they've lost it because their DACA has expired. So even if Congress passed legislation today and the president signed a bill today, people whose work authorization expires in March or in April will lose their jobs. And how long they are out of work before they can get new work authorization and could be either given their job back by their old employer, or in the case that that employer has had to move on to someone else, find a new job, how long that is that they're out of work will depend on how quickly Congress acts. And that's why this is incredibly urgent. There's a passage in Proverbs chapter 3 that I really hope our members of Congress will take to heart. It says in Proverbs 3:27 and 28, "Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due, when it is in your power to act. Do not say to your neighbor, 'Come back tomorrow, and I'll give it to you,' when you already have it with you." Congress can do this now. They can do this today. This is actually an incredibly popular piece of legislation. There's been 2 polls out this week that have found that more than 80% of Americans want Dreamers, these people who've benefited from DACA, to be able to stay in the country lawfully, to be able to keep their jobs, and the vast majority of Americans actually want them to be able to eventually earn citizenship in this country that they love, that they consider their homes. So it's in Congress's power to act, and we want to challenge them to do so. Because while it's ultimately only in Congress's full authority to act, it's also within your power to act as well, because Congress is responsive to their constituents. If they're getting hundreds or thousands of phone calls from the people who represent them, for the people whom they represent, who can vote for their reelection or for the election of someone else, they will take action. The reality is most of us support this. Most of us are sympathetic. The polls all show that, and that's true whether you're a supporter of President Trump or a supporter of Secretary Clinton, whether you're a Republican or Democrat or Independent. Majorities of all these different subgroups of Americans support this legislation, but most of us do so rather passively. We wait for Congress to do so, and if a pollster calls us on a poll, we say, yeah, we'd support that. But I want to challenge you to take action, to make a phone call. I just called my member of Congress and my 2 senators. It took about 5 minutes to call all 3, and that's because we've made it super easy at powertoact.org. You put in your address just so we can figure out which member of Congress represents you, not to send you spam mail. Put in your phone number, and then you'll actually receive a phone call immediately. You don't even have to dial a phone number. You pick up the phone, follow the prompts, and we'll even give you a script. It's super easy, and it took me about 5 minutes to call the 3 individuals who represent me in Washington. That's the least we can do, is make 3 phone calls in 5 minutes. For the many brothers and sisters who are directly affected by this, for their families, for the church communities that are directly impacted by this. And then the last thing I'd ask you to do is don't stop at your 3 calls. Challenge other people to do the same. Make a video like this one, though probably shorter, just explaining why you care about Dreamers, why you want Congress to pass a permanent solution for those who benefited from DACA. Post it to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and tag a few people and say, hey, I'm challenging you to use your power to act as well. Again, powertoact.org, and use the hashtag powertoact. Thanks.